Chapter 6. The Captain's Papers. We rode hard all the way till we drove up before Dr. Lavazzi's door. The house was all dark to the front. Mr. Dance told me to jump down and knock, and Dogger gave me a stirrup to descend by. The door was opened almost at once by the maid. "Is Dr. Lavazzi in?" I asked. "No," she said. "He had come home earlier in the afternoon, but had gone up to the hall to dine and pass the evening with the squire." "So there we go, boys," said Mr. Dance. This time, as the distance was short, I did not mount, but ran with Dogger's stirrup leather to the lodge gates, and up the long, leafless, moonlit avenue, to where the white line of hall buildings looked on either hand on great old gardens. Here Mr. Dance dismounted, and, taking me along with him, was admitted at a word into the house. The servant led us down a matted passage and showed us at the end to a great library, all lined with bookcases and busts on top of them, where the squire and Dr. Lavazzi sat, pipe in hand, on either side of a bright fire. I had never seen the squire so near at hand. He was a tall man, over 6 feet high, and broad in proportion, and he had a bluff, rough and ready face, all roughened and reddened and lined in his long travels. His eyebrows were very black, and moved readily, and this gave him the look of some temper. Not bad, you would say, but quick and high. "Come in, Mr. Dance," says he, very stately and condescending. "Good evening, Dance," said the doctor with a nod, "and good evening to you, friend Jim. What good wind brings you here?" The supervisor stood up straight and stiff and told his story like a lesson. And you should see how the two gentlemen leaned forward and looked at each other, and forgot to smoke in their surprise and interest. When they heard how my mother went in back to the inn, Dr. Lavazzi fairly slapped his thigh, and the squire cried "Bravo!" and broke his long pipe against the grate. Long before it was done, Mr. Trelawney, that you will remember was the squire's name, had got up from his seat and was stirring about the room, and the doctor, as if to hear better, had taken off his powdered wig and sat there looking very strange indeed with his own close-cropped black poll. At last Mr. Dance finished his story. "Mr. Dance," said the squire, "you're a very noble fellow. As for writing down that black, atrocious miscreant, I regard it as an act of virtue, sir, like stamping on a cockroach. This lad Hawkins is a trump, I perceive. Hawkins, will you ring that bell? Mr. Dance must have some ale." "And so, Jim," said the doctor, have you the thing that we were after, have you?" "Here it is, sir," said I, and gave him the oilskin packet. The doctor looked it over as if his fingers were itching to open it, but instead of doing that, he put it quietly into the pocket of his coat. "Squire," said he, "when Dance has had his ale, and he must, of course, be off in his Majesty's service, but I mean to keep Jim Hawkins here to sleep at my house, and, with your permission, I propose that we should have up the cold pie and let him sup." "As you will, Lavazzi," said the squire. "Hawkins has earned better than cold pie." So a big pigeon pie was brought in and put on a side table, and I made a hearty supper, for I was hungry as a hawk, while Mr. Dance was further complimented and at last dismissed. "And now, squire," said the doctor. "And now, Lavazzi," said the squire in the same breath. One at a time," laughed Dr. Lavazzi. "Have you heard of this Flint, I suppose?" "Heard of him!" cried the squire. "Heard of him, you say? He was the bloodthirstiest buccaneer that sailed. Blackbeard was a child to Flint. The Spaniards were so prodigiously afraid of him that I tell you, sir, I was sometimes proud he was an Englishman. I've seen his topsails with these eyes off Trinidad, and the cowardly son of a rum puncheon that I sailed with put back, sir, into port of Spain." "Well, I've heard of him myself in England," said the doctor. "But the point is, had he money?" "Money!" cried the squire. "Have you heard the story what these villains were after but money? What do they care for but money? What would they risk their rascal carcasses but money?" "That we shall soon know," replied the doctor. "But you are so confoundedly hot-headed and exclamatory that I cannot get a word in. What I want to know is this. Supposing that I have a friend here, in my pocket, some clue to where Flint buried his treasure, will that treasure amount to much?" "Amount, sir!" cried the squire. It will amount to this. If we have a clue that you're talking about, I will fit out a ship at Bristol Dock and take you and Hawkins here along, and I'll have the treasure if I search a year. Very well, said the doctor. Now then, if Jim is agreeable, we'll open this packet. And he laid it before him on the table. The bundle was sewn together, and the doctor had to get out his instrument case and cut the stitches with his medical scissors. It contained two things, a book and a sealed paper. First of all, we'll try the book, observed the doctor. The squire and I were both peering over his shoulder as he opened it, for Dr. Livesey had kindly motioned to me to come round from the side table, where I had been eating, to enjoy the sport of the search. On the first page there were only some scraps of writing, such as a man with a pen in his hand might make for idleness or practice. One was the same as the tattoo bark, Billy Bones his fancy. And then there was Mr. W. Bones, mate. No more rum. Off Palm Key he got it. And some other snatches, mostly single words and unintelligible. I could not help wondering who it was that got it, and what it was that he got. A knife in the back, as like as not. Not much instruction here, said Dr. Livesey as he passed on. The next 10 or 12 pages were filled with a curious series of entries. There was a date at one end of a line and the other a sum of money, as commonly in account books. But instead of explanatory writing, only a varying number of crosses between the two. On the 12th of June, 1745, for instance, a sum of £70 had plainly become due to someone, and there was nothing but 6 crosses to explain the cause. In a few cases, to be sure, the name of a place would be added. Off Caracas, or a mere latitude and longitude, such as 62 degrees, 17 minutes, 20 seconds, 19 degrees, 2 minutes, 40 seconds. The record lasted over nearly 20 years, the amount of separate entries growing larger as time went on. And at the end, a grand total had been made out, after 5 or 6 wrong additions, and these words appended, Bones, his pile. I can't make head or tail of this, said Dr. Livesey. The thing is clear as noonday, cried the squire. This is a black-hearted hound's account book. These crosses stands for the names of ships or towns they sank or plundered. The sums are the scoundrel's share, and where he feared an ambiguity, he set something clearer. Off Caracas now, you see here was some unhappy vessel boarded off that coast. God help the poor souls that manned her coral long ago. Right, said the doctor. See what it is to be a traveler? Right, and the amounts increased, you see, as he rose in rank. There was little else in the volume but a few bearings of places noted in the blank leaves toward the end, and a table for reducing French, English, and Spanish moneys to a common value. Thrifty man, cried the doctor. He wasn't one to be cheated. And now, said the squire, for the other. The paper had been sealed in several places with a thimble by way of a seal. The very thimble, perhaps, I had found in the captain's pocket. The doctor opened the seals with great care, and there fell out of the map of an island, with longitude and latitude, soundings, names of hills, bays, and inlets, and every particular that would be needed to bring a ship to a safe anchorage upon its shores. It was about 9 miles long and 5 across, shaped, you might say, like a fat dragon standing up. It had 2 fine-looking landlocked harbors, and a hill in the center part marked the spyglass. There were several editions of a later date, but above all 3 crosses of red ink, 2 on the north part of the island, 1 on the southwest. Beside the last, in the same red ink and in a small neat hand, very different from the captain's tawdry characters, these words, Bulk of treasure here. Over on the back, the same hand had written this further information. Tall tree, spyglass shoulder, bearing a point north of the north-northeast. Skeleton Island, east-southeast and by east, 10 feet. The bar silver is in the north cache. You can find it by the trend to the east hummock. 10 fathoms south of the black crag with a face on it. The arms are easily found in the sandhill, north of the North Inlet Cape, bearing east and a quarter north, JF. That was all, but brief as it was, and to me incomprehensible. It filled the squire and Dr. Livesey with delight. Livesey, said the squire, You will give up this wretched practice at once. Tomorrow I start for Bristol. In 3 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 10 days, we'll have the best ship, sir, and the choicest crew in England. Hawkins shall come as cabin boy. You'll make a famous cabin boy, Hawkins. You, Levesi, are the ship's doctor. I am admiral. We'll take Redruth, Joyce, and Hunter. We'll have favorable winds, a quick passage, and not the least difficulty in finding the spot. And money to eat, to roll in, to play duck and drake with ever after. Trelawney, said the doctor, I'll go with you, and I'll go bail for it. So will Jim, and be a credit to the undertaking. There's only one man I'm afraid of. And who's that? Cried the squire. Name the dog, sir. You, replied the doctor, for you could not hold your tongue. We are not the only men who know of this paper. These fellows who attacked the inn tonight, bold, desperate blades for sure, and the rest stayed aboard that lugger, and more, I dare say, not far off, are, one and all, through thick and thin, bound that they'll get that money. We must none of us go alone till we get to sea. Jim and I shall stick together in the meanwhile. You'll take Joyce and Hunter when you ride to Bristol, and from first to last, not one of us must breathe a word of what we found. Levesi, returned the squire, you're always in the right of it. I shall be as silent as the grave. This is the end of chapter 6 and the end of part 1. So a couple of things. The latitude and longitude. So it was measured in degrees, minutes, and seconds. Nowadays, when you use GPSs and such, you say so many degrees, decimal point, numbers. Because that's just easier for the computers and such. Back 30 years ago even, it was hours, minutes, seconds. So you have 360 degrees around the globe, and then each degree was broken up into 60 minutes. So just like a clock. So you have 360 degrees, and then inside of each degree you had 60 minutes, and inside of each minute you had 60 seconds. So that was how they did it back then, because it was just easy enough to do, and that was the standard way of doing it, because, it was like everyone understood a clock. And this kind of goes back to Around the World in 80 Days, because they said in the book a couple of times, every degree is so many minutes. And clocks and navigation east and west are very tied together, because until Prince Henry the Navigator came up with a clock that kept good time on a rocking ship, it was very difficult to tell how far east or west you were. You could easily tell how far north and south you were because you had a sextant. So you line up the bottom of the sextant with the horizon, and then you use the top of the sextant to figure out how far up the sun was. And once you had how high the sun was in the sky, you'd look up a table, and the table would tell you, okay, on June 8th, the sun is 25 degrees up in the sky. That means that it is this time of the year, or this time of the day. And if you knew how far off that time of the day was with the sun, and how far off that was from England, then you would know, oh, I am 35 degrees west, or I'm 22 degrees west, or I am 80 degrees east. Because you knew where the sun was, and you knew the time of the day. So once you have those two numbers, there's a chart. It's like, okay. And the charts, the cheap charts only listed noon. So noon at this height means that you're this far west. And so if you have the clock, you have the time, and you know where the sun's at the top point. Then you can just all put it together and figure out how far east and west you were. Or, sorry, how far north and south you were. East and west, as I said, you need a clock. Which, once they had a clock, hours, minutes, seconds, it all just made sense to go degrees, minutes, seconds. Now, there was another thing. Levesi said that the only thing he was scared of was Squire Trelawney. And Squire Trelawney having a loose mouth and telling everybody what the plan was. Because, he was right. The pirates knew about the map, knew that there was a map. Other people would have heard of Flint's treasure. Everybody knew of Flint's treasure, that this just massive pile of money, silver plate, gold, jewels, riches, guns, all of this stuff. They knew that Flint had this incredible treasure. And if Trelawney goes blabbing around, hey, yeah, we're going to go and get treasure, everybody would be like, yeah, we're going to go and get treasure. And we're going to cut you out. So, that's what he was afraid of. That, LaVese, smart guy. Trelawney, kind of hot-headed, but, maybe not that stupid. Trelawney was like, LaVese was like, Trelawney is going to blow this for us. He's just going to blab. Now, secrecy is important at a lot of times. And people get into all sorts of trouble by telling things to people who they shouldn't. Your father has some stories that he may want to tell you about where he told the wrong people the wrong things and ended up in trouble. But other times he's shown remarkable prudence. There's an old saying that dates back to World War II. It was big on propaganda posters. And it said, loose lips sink ships. And what that was about was, during World War II, the United States made guns and tanks and airplanes and everything. I mean, we supplied just everything for the war. And it was all sent across the Atlantic in ships, and then later across the Pacific. Well, it was sent across the Atlantic in ships. And the Nazis had submarines that were like the best in the world. I mean, these were just like brilliant submarines. And they hunted in packs. So you had these 4 or 5 subs that would work together, and they would circle the transports, and they would just like take them all out at once. And I mean, it was just like brilliant tactics. But a lot of it depended on knowing when the ships came out, because subs were slower than most ships. So the subs had to know when the ships were coming out, get into position, and then they could just like circle, take them all. But and they also helped to know when, where the destroyers were, because, the destroyers could take out a sub, but subs could just like tear apart the transports. So it really depended on advanced intelligence. Now, even though the Nazis were terrible people, there were some people in the US who thought they weren't that bad. So they were spies for Germany. And they would radio the subs, they would use semaphore, they would use signals saying, oh, big unprotected fleet leaving on Tuesday. Or just send up 2 fires for Tuesday, or whatever the signal was. Signal the subs, and the subs would be with the periscope and look, oh, there's 2 fires Tuesday. So the fleet would go out, and they would see, oh, 2 fires Tuesday, circle the fleet, sink them all. So it was very important during World War II. It's like, don't tell when the ships are going out, because, they would be sitting there in dock, loaded up, and they would wait. And then all of a sudden they would just all get up and go. And no one would know exactly when or where. It's like they'd sail with the tide, but, there's 2 tides a day, 7 days a week. That's 14 opportunities to sneak out. So, they would go and sneak out. But if some sailor goes, oh, man, I hate sailing out on Tuesday, and a bartender is like, Tuesday, sends a message, and all of a sudden, so it was loose leak ships sink ships. Now this goes back to your dad. Your dad was in the Navy, just like Uncle Samples. The 2 of them met at Groton at Subase Enlon, which is submarine base New London, which is across the river from Groton. I never figured out why Groton submarine base is called Subase Enlon, but such is life. Anyway, we were visiting your dad at the sub base, and we were staying at a hotel, and the hotel overlooked the river. It's beautiful, beautiful river. Anyway, we saw a sub going up the river, and your mom was like, what sub is that? Or his mom was like, Lolly was like, hey, what sub is that? And your dad was like, I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of a boat in the Connecticut River. It's like, Paul, it's in the paper over there. If we walked over and looked, we'd see which ship was arriving today. I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of a boat in the Connecticut River. So, secrecy can be important. At other times, secrecy can be stupid. Here, in this instance, with Squire Trelawney and Dr. Levesi and Jim Hawkins, I would say secrecy is going to be pretty important. So we'll find out if Squire Trelawney manages to keep the secret. And if he doesn't manage to keep the secret, what happens in part 2? We shall find out.